Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me today. This is Cheryl. I'm so glad that you're here. In this video, I'm going to share with you how I created these 3 cards. Lately, I've been doing lots of things with layering stencils, and one of the layers I typically like to put some glitter paste. It's a very simple and easy way just to add a little bit of dimension and sparkle to those layering stencil images. In this video, I'm going to use some Tim Holtz stencils. They all are floral stencils, and I'm just going to ink blend with that one stencil. These don't come as layering stencils, so there's just one layer to them, but they've got some beautiful floral images to them. And after I'm done ink blending, I will put some glitter paste through it. The cool thing is I'm using distress inks and they are activated with water. So once we put the glimmer paste on there, the glitter paste, the moisture from that paste is going to blend the inks even further than just blending it through the stencil. So the very first color that I'm using is a light green. I'll have all the colors listed and linked down below. This one is Bundled Sage, and the darker of the greens I'm using is Peeled Paint. I really like using these 2 colors together. I'm using an ink blending brush, and I'm just coloring in all of the areas that are the green leaves. Now, if I get a little bit on my flowers, I'm not really worried too much about it, but if you want to make sure that you don't get color where you don't want it to go, you can use some painter's tape or dye tape and tape those areas off. That's the best way to ensure that you don't accidentally get ink where you don't want it to go, or else use smaller blending brushes. For some of this, I am going to use some detail blending brushes just to get more concentrated ink where I want it. And especially when I'm using some of the darker colors, it's just a little bit easier, an easier way, because the brush is a lot smaller, to concentrate the ink in areas that I don't, or that I want it to go. I like to use my darker colors towards the center or the base of the leaves and on the stems. And I also like to blend it out a little bit. So I'll start where I want my color to be the darkest, and then I'll just blend it out a little bit so I get some gradation between the dark and the light. Like I said, the glimmer paste is going to continue to blend these out. So even if you don't get a perfect blend, you have a little bit of forgiveness once the paste is added to it. If you wanted to create these cards without having any of the glitter paste on it, you just want to make sure to blend a little bit more thoroughly in this first layer. I'm just doing it very quickly because I know that the moisture from that paste is going to blend the inks a little bit more. And I do get a little bit of green from the light color on some of my floral areas, but I think it looks really pretty and adds a little bit to the effect once it's done. It doesn't bother me, but like I said, if that bothers you and you don't want to do that, either use a smaller blending brush or tape off the areas where you don't want the ink to go. The blue here that I'm using, I'm just doing it on some smaller blue flowers. The color is Speckled Egg, but I already had some blue on my blending brush before I did this. So the actual color that's going on the card is more like Tumbled Glass. I believe that's the last color that I used with this brush. Typically I have brushes for each of the rainbow colors, yellow, blue, green, orange, pink, and I use that same brush for all of the shades. If you don't want to have ink from the previous project, make sure to put it on a scrap piece of paper before you start. I typically don't mind sometimes because I think you get some interesting blends this way. But if you're really wanting to have the color only be what you're choosing for that particular project, just use some scrap paper and get all the excess color off of your brushes before you do this. So now I'm using Shaded Lilac and then Dusty Concord for these flowers. I'm going to do one card that has purple flowers, one that has pink, and one that has like a corally color to them. So when you're doing the flowers, I like to do the darkest color towards the center of the flower, just kind of giving it a little bit of a natural shadow. And with all of these flowers, I'm using a bigger blending brush for the light color, and then I'm using a smaller blending brush for the dark part. Now I'm using some Distress dye inks here. You could also use the Distress Oxide, or another brand of dye inks would work as well. The Oxide inks would have a little bit more opacity to them. For this particular project, I chose the dye inks because I love how they have a little bit of transparency to them, and that's because they don't have the pigment properties that the Oxide inks have. I'm also using 3 different colors for each of the cards. If you wanted to create a set, you could easily make all 3 cards have flowers in the same colors. That would look really, really pretty too. I just wanted to show how the different color blends look and figured the best way to do that would be 3 different cards with 3 different floral stencils. And you can see how quick and easy it is to create the fronts for these cards by having them all taped down and just doing them all at once. Once I have my ink blending completely done, I'm going to do all of the glitter paste at once as well, and then let them dry completely before I start to assemble my cards. By having both of my paper and my stencils taped down before I started, I can make sure that they are going to stay exactly where I want them to, and I don't have to worry about them moving. Because these particular stencils don't go all the way across the paper, it only covers about 3/4 of the card front, I am making sure to swipe that glimmer paste from the right to the left to make sure that I don't accidentally get a little bit off of the stencil. By doing it from right to left, I have a little bit more control over this. Now you may notice as you're doing this that you do pick up some of the dye inks that are on top of the stencils. If that bothers you, you can wipe off your palette knife before getting some more paste. Typically when I'm doing glimmer paste, if I have excess, I'll put it back into the container, and you'll see after this last one, once I put it back in the container, it has a bit of an orange color to it, and that's because it's picked up some of the orange from the ink that has been on top of that stencil. Now I'm lifting up my stencils off of that glimmer paste, and the first thing I'm going to do is clean off that glitter paste off of my tools. If it happens to dry on there, it's going to be much more difficult to take off, and I don't want to risk that happening. Easiest way is to clean the tools off before continuing. It does take a while for that glimmer paste to dry, so I let it dry completely overnight. Now this purple card here, I did get a little bit of ink and a little bit of glimmer paste on a flower that I didn't want it on there. So I decided to tear the edge for a different look. Now to be honest, I'm not a fan. I actually don't like this card in the end. I really love the color of the flowers, but what I wish I had done was leave that paper there and just choose to put my sentiment over top of it. It would have been a much easier fix, but sometimes once you've chosen to do something a certain way, you can't go back. And in this case, obviously, I can't go back and glue that paper back on. The only fix for it would have been to completely redo that stenciled image. And I kind of thought, I was curious how it would look in the end. So I've chosen some papers as a mat behind my floral image. And one of the things that I like to do is if I'm doing a sentiment and I want some of the cardstock die cut and I want it exactly the same color as my mat, I will just die cut out of that mat. And I've done this in my last couple of videos. When you have a mat that goes behind paper, unless that paper is translucent or transparent, you're never going to see if something was die cut in there. I've been doing this for years and no one has ever known until I've told them. So I've cut all my shadows out of the mat behind my image, and then I cut some glitter cardstock for the top part of my sentiment to echo the glitter paste that is in the cards. Last step is just to glue all of those layers together. While my mats are drying and I'm gluing my sentiment, I'll put an acrylic block on top of there to help hold it in place while it's drying. I like to use Distress Collage medium because if any of it happens to seep out, it dries completely matte and completely clear. But sometimes with liquid glues, it can warp the paper a little bit while it's drying. It doesn't dry warped at all, so you don't have to worry about that. But by having an acrylic block or something heavy on top of it, it just frees your hand to do other things while those are drying. Once I've glued my sentiment together, I can put that right on top of my card where I want it to go. And then once again, I'm going to put that glitter or that acrylic block on top of it to hold it in place. Because I'm gluing it on top of the glitter paste, there's a little bit of a different height discrepancy between my card base and the top of that glimmer paste. So I want to make sure there's something on there that's holding it flat to keep good contact with the different areas of the card. All three of my cards are assembled in a very similar way. The only difference is the colors and then where I choose to put that sentiment. This particular sentiment is a Pink Fresh Studios die. It's called Scripted Greetings. And it's got one that says thanks, one that says hello, and one that says celebrate. It's really pretty and it's also really simple. I chose to just put those 3 words on the 3 different cards. You could easily add some tiny text sentiments or something like that underneath that as well if you wanted to add a little bit extra to it. For these particular cards, I liked the simplicity of it. You could always stamp a different sentiment on the inside of the card if you wanted to add to it as well. And it's really easy to choose a coordinating ink that you use to stencil in the images for doing that center. So here are the final 3 cards completed. You'll notice how that ink has blended a little bit more underneath that glimmer paste, but the sparkle is really, really pretty. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a fabulous day.